Before I dive into the presentation, on behalf of SAP, it's a great honor to welcome all of you here in the SAP Berlin office for the Berlin leg of the InnerSource Summit, celebrating 10 years of InnerSource Summits. We are really delighted to host this gathering of the InnerSource community here, and we wish all of you here in the room, as well as joining online, a really inspiring and engaging event day. So with that, in the next 30 minutes, I want to have together with you a closer look at an open source, at an InnerSource-based collaboration model that we have established at SAP to align on our architecture decisions and technology guidelines, and to also make sure that they are adopted across the whole company. So why is that a problem? Probably all of you have already heard about Conway's law, which basically says that if you build complex software systems, they will more or less automatically always mirror the structure of your organization. And why is that a problem? Maybe this is best exemplified by the example of the Mars Climate Orbiter. It was constructed in 1998 in a cooperation between NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin's software used imperial units for measuring pound seconds, whereas NASA's JPL's navigation software used metric units, so Newton seconds. And after the several months of flight, when the spacecraft arrived at the orbit from Mars, it arrived much lower in the orbit than planned, and that led to the fact that more or less it fell to the ground and was destroyed, which was a multi-million-dollar disaster. And NASA's analysis just summarized it was a measurement mismatch between two software systems that were built by two different organizations. And of course, a company like SAP is also not immune to Conway's law. You might know that we are the global leader in enterprise business software, especially in SaaS, cloud business software. We have more than 110,000 employees worldwide, distributed over more than 100 locations. We have built most of our business software solutions organically in-house, but also made strategic tuck-in acquisitions of solutions. And yeah, that leads to the fact that if you build such a complex suite of business software with a lot of different line of businesses involved, a lot of different locations involved, then you are also facing effects of Conway's law. And some years back, this would have been a $1 million question you could have asked at SAP. How many implementations of the same functionality do we have in our company? And as an example, we can take, for instance, audit logging service. And I don't know what the actual number was, but it's probably not very unlikely that we had 3 to 5 different implementations of a logging service. And why was that the case? In 2018, our cloud portfolio basically on the highest level looked a little bit like this. We had different solutions for HR, for customer relationship management, for supply chain management, for contingent workers, for travel management. Some of them were developed in-house, some were acquired. And yeah, if you acquire companies, then of course they normally come with their own audit logging service, for instance. But even in-house, sometimes teams might have developed independently the same functionality redundantly. And as a company, what we do, or what we did, is we consolidate in our own technology platform. So of course, we only want to have one audit logging service that is used by all of these applications to avoid effort on our side. But even more important for the customers, sometimes they are just using one of these applications, and then they expect a best of breed experience. Sometimes they are using several or all of these applications, and then they expect the best of suite experience so that everything seamlessly works together. And if you have, for instance, 3 or 5 different audit logs and you want to analyze a security incident, then for the customer it's very painful. These logs might have different data sources, they might have different formats, and an end-to-end analysis of a security problem becomes tricky. So that's why what our customers expect from us is that we have all these different applications seamlessly integrated into an intelligent business suite, and also processes like, for instance, design to order, they should run across all these different SaaS applications, passing the relevant data which is shared between them, passing workflows between them, having a single sign-on for all of these solutions, having a global search where you can search across all these solutions without specifying in which one you want to search. And that is why we have, so to say, a twofold task. Our application line of business development areas, they have to analyze these end-to-end business processes and develop the functional requirements or the functions that are missing to support these end-to-end processes. And in the business technology platform, we have to provide these central services that are shared across all these applications. And we have to provide guidelines, technology guidelines, for how to use these services so that they are used in a fully integrated, seamless, unified way. So in our example of the audit logging, for instance, you would need a technology guideline specifying what kind of events have to be audit logged, security relevant ones, access to specific personal data. And then the guideline has to specify which service do you use to log it. In our case, then it would be the BTP audit log service. And then the format, how you log such an event. So we have to define an event catalog with corresponding formats that have to be used. And last but not least, ideally we also provide some onboarding guidelines and some reference implementation where application teams can find examples of how to use the service correctly. And yeah, that led us to the fact to develop these technology guidelines in a way that they are enterprise grade and that our application development units are willing to adopt them. You somehow have to overcome the challenge of Conway's law. So we need a collaboration model to jointly build these technology guidelines that scales across the whole company and all line of businesses. That is also having formal reviews and approvals by all our line of businesses so that there is a full buy-in. It cannot be just a greenfield development. We have different technology stacks like Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes or even ABAP in the cloud. It has to work for all of them. That needs to be evidence-based. So these guidelines have to be used at least in one productive customer scenario so that they are proven to work. And last but not least, it has to be integrated into the development planning, into the release planning of each line of businesses, that they really adopt the guidelines in their release plans. And that is how we came up with our cross-product architecture CPA collaboration model. It's a cross-company collaboration model that brings together experts from the consumers, our application development units, and from our technology providers, SAP Business Technology Platform, in so-called working groups. And within these working groups, the participants align on the technology guidelines and the according requirements, and they take architecture decisions, for instance, which service to be used for logging or which format the events have to be logged in and things like that. So this new CPA model offers an organizational setup and working mode for an open collaboration within the whole company based on InnerSource. It has representative governance. That means every line of business has to nominate at least one representative that is entitled to review such guidelines and to vote on their approval. It has a dedicated set of tooling and documentation, how we organize this, and the tooling itself is also developed as InnerSource, so everybody can contribute to the tooling. And there's a central program management team that is evolving this collaboration model itself and is also doing so in InnerSource mode. So the working groups, we have dozens of them. Here are just 4 examples. They are oriented around architecture domains, for instance, identity and access management, or agentic AI, or APIs and events. And in the example that we had with audit logging, that would belong to the architecture topic of observability. And normally each of these working groups organizes themselves in sub-work streams so that they can work more focused on specific topics. And in the observability working group, we have our audit logging work stream that fits to the example that we used so far. And within these working groups, we have different roles, a little bit comparable to an open source project. We have core contributors and the leaders of the working group, who are kind of the maintainer, the pendant to maintainers in open source. We have additional contributors, and then we have these nominated representatives from every line of business, which have the formal expertise and authority to review the results of the working group and to vote for approving them. And as it is InnerSource, every interested party or colleague in the company can also register so that they receive updates on status of the working group, and they can also participate in all the working group meetings if they want to. And typical deliveries are the technology guidelines. We have seen an example how that could look like for audit logging, and also architecture decision records. So sometimes you have to make an architecture decision. For instance, if we had like these 5 different audit logging service implementations, which one is the one now that we want to use in our technology platform as a single one to be used from there on? And for that, you write typically an architecture decision document with a decision record with the requirements. And then for each of the alternatives, in this case of each of the 5 possible implementations, you will give pros and cons, and then you take a decision on which one to use. And by the way, this is more or less a variant of the InnerSource pattern that we saw in the previous presentation, called transparent cross-team decision-making using RFCs. And in addition, there are also kind of implementation deliverables. Proof of concept is normally used to analyze a specific aspect and prove that it works. For instance, when there's an architecture decision record, and you might want to implement a proof of concept that the service you have decided on to be the one and only really fulfills all the requirements. Then you also need a front runner before a technology guideline is adopted by the whole company, meaning it has to be implemented at least in one productive customer scenario and verified and validated by customers before we put it into mass adoption. And ideally, we have an onboarding guide and reference implementation for our application teams to provide them with information how to do it correctly. I mentioned already the review process. It's supported by a central tool where you can find all the documents that have ever been reviewed and also the ones that are in planning. Here you see an example for this technology guideline for audit logging, and the nominated organization contacts that we saw on the role slide. They are then reviewing as subject matter experts these documents, and they cast a vote in Jira, and only if we have a 2/3 majority of approvals, the guideline will get into effect. So basically, this model helps us to evolve from concept to mass adoption. In the working groups, we create technology guidelines or architecture decision records. We ground them by proof of concept implementations. And when a document has been successfully reviewed and approved, we do at least one front-runner implementation together with one line of business and have it validated by customers. And only after that, if everybody agrees that this is ready for mass adoption, then it becomes a mandatory part to be implemented in all our line of business solutions, and it's a fixed part of the release planning then, and every LOB has to provide transparency on which of these technology guideline requirements they have implemented already and when they will implement the missing ones. So maybe that was a little bit abstract. Let's have a quick look at kind of a case study. In this case, open resource discovery, the specification for open source resource discovery. What does it mean? There's a challenge when it comes to business applications, especially cloud applications, they are emitting thousands of, or they are providing thousands of APIs. In our case, we have more than 56,000 REST operations. All of these APIs and operations and events have to be somehow in a catalog where you can find it and where it can also be processed in a machine-readable form. But today, it's a very siloed thing. So typically APIs and events are described with specifications like Open API or Cloud Events or OData, and they reside in an API catalog. But when it comes to agentic AI, then you have MCP or A2A specification, and again, a separate catalog. When it comes to data products, you have a different way of describing them, again, a different catalog. And when it comes to enterprise architecture, it's again a different one. And that somehow leads to the fact that it's hard to get a holistic view, that integration is much more difficult, end-to-end integration, and also that you can see some kind of metadata drift in these different catalogs. And what is required here is we needed a common language or a common protocol that we can handle and discover all these different types of metadata in one unified way. And also on the catalog level, we need one unified catalog, ideally as a graph, which connects all these different metadata stores. And then if you have such a shared discovery protocol and a unified machine-readable metadata contract, then you have clear information which resources in the system exposes, where you can and how you can access them via URLs, in which tenant, which version, how to access them, with what kind of authorization, and how they relate to business capabilities. And yeah, when we started to work on this, we did it in our API Business Hub development unit, and they were historically mainly concerned with APIs and events. So the first versions that we created were quite narrow. They missed certain domains of metadata that we just had a look at and certain requirements, and somehow that led to the fact that adoption within the company was kind of stalling because it was not really applicable or relevant for certain lines of businesses. What we then did is we transferred the work into a dedicated work stream within the CPA working group API and events. So we put this development of the specification under the new CPA collaboration model that I described previously. And by doing so, now running it as InnerSource, we found new contributors, several within the companies, and new stakeholders. And we were able to produce a version 1.0, which was actively supported and voted for by 4 lines of businesses. And meanwhile, we have 6 ADRs approved and more are in progress. And those are now supported already by more than 10 plus lines of businesses. And yeah, that shows that with this collaboration model based on InnerSource, we have somehow a broader scope for the specification. It does justice to more different kinds of use cases and scenarios based on the requirements of the different LOBs. We have a faster evolution of the specification, and we get much better company-wide adoption. And yeah, meanwhile, this specification is a basis for our metadata catalog at SAP and also for our customer landscape introspection. And the interesting thing is that we saw this is not only relevant internally, but meanwhile, we also use the specification as an exchange format for exchanging metadata with Databricks, with Google, with Snowflake. So there was also a high interest in the external community. And that is why we decided to publish the specification as open source on GitHub. And if you run an open source project like that, then other companies might not want to depend on SAP somehow being the only one responsible for the specification. That's why we even went a step further and transferred it to the Neonefos Foundation. That is some foundation under the umbrella of Linux Foundation Europe, which SAP created together with other companies like Stackit and T-Systems. And the goal was to put the specification really under neutral community governance. And the fact that this really works is kind of validated by an API World Award that the specification just received in September at the API World Conference. So I think that is really showing that what we first created internally has been so general and so mature that it was easy to also meet needs of external communities with that specification. And now, of course, with the external contributions, we can even take it to the next level. So, summarizing, this new collaboration model, fully based on InnerSource, is a success story at SAP. As you have seen, it's well suited for developing technology guidelines, architecture documents, specifications. As all stakeholders are involved, we are ensuring that we are not writing greenfield specifications that are not relevant, but that the efforts we do are really 100% in sync with what our line of businesses need for application development. We have full transparency with the tooling and with the way we document. Everything we do is as code, so the specifications, everything you find in our internal enterprise GitHub, and people can open pull requests and issues. And yeah, as we are involving all stakeholders early on, there's also a much higher willingness to adopt. And last but not least, by this shared transparency, shared ownership, the transparency and cross-unit alignment, we also get faster consensus and better integration for our integrated suite. And yeah, in addition, and that is a very important fact, this CPA collaboration model is now officially anchored in SAP's governance through so-called integrated release planning. That is also presented to the executive board. That means all lines of business have to regularly report on the adoption of the TG and the according requirements in their release plans. Yeah, and meanwhile, we have reached quite some scale with this collaboration model. It's measured by numbers of employees involved. It's our largest InnerSource project with more than 5,000 colleagues having been actively involved at one time or the other. We have we have 35 working groups, 179 active work streams, 43 active technology guidelines, and yeah, also 17 front-runner implementations running right now, and 33 that have been successfully completed. And now, outlook for the future, what's next? As this collaboration model was so successful, we have seen cases that it's also used for non-architecture topics. For instance, we run our InnerSource and open source cross-topic when we, for instance, want to define, when we defined SAP's open source manifesto, we also ran it as a working group in the open source working group as a work stream. And because of the fact that it's now, it will now be used for more or less all the different collaboration relevant topics in product engineering and cloud operations. And that's why we now renamed it recently from cross-product architecture to cross-product alignment. And it now serves at SAP as a unified collaboration framework across the whole company, which also replaces some of the previous collaboration models that we had before, so that we have greater consistency and a higher impact. For instance, we had already a CTO circle with its own collaboration model before, which has now been transferred into a working group of CPA. And we also had SAP product standards with their own governance and collaboration model. And the standards are also now transferred into the CPA working group compliance. And just now we are creating a work stream in the compliance working group for the EU Cyber Resilience Act to make sure that the requirements defined by the Cyber Resilience Act will be implemented in a unified way across the company. Yeah, with that, I'm at the end. I hope this might be an example that might be perhaps also relevant for your company and inspire you. We would be more than happy to discuss with you if you have similar needs for cross-company collaboration and how you are solving it. And yeah, with that, I would open it for questions and answers.